The RPG Maker series of development apps has had a huge history in the East, and nowadays it is fairly accessible in the West as well. By making it easy to program the classic mechanics of RPGs into games, it has helped creators who would have found programming a game engine from scratch too daunting. And it has eventually given us some really creative and memorable games, such as Off, Lisa the Painful, or even the recent indie hit Omori. But surprisingly, not every game produced by the RPG Maker engines could really be considered an RPG, at least if we stick to the traditional definition of it. Some of the most popular games produced under the RPGM name are none other than horror games, ones that lack turn-based combat, experience points, equipment, or any of the defining features that one would expect from regular role-playing games. Turns out, the engine is great for developing games about exploration, puzzles, chase scenes, and generally dark settings. And the game that popularized this format was simply known as Corpse Party. Originally released in 1996 for the PC-98, yes, the Toho OS, this game made use of the Tsukuru Dante 98 version of the software, which, just like the PC-98, was not released in '98. It was made by indie/doujin creators Makoto Kedoin and Team Gris Gris, and just like the other notable PC-98 series, it has become a massive hit despite being something made by hobbyists with what's essentially no budget. It has spawned multiple official continuations, some spin-offs, an anime adaptation, 6 manga serializations, some of which were on the same magazine as Fullmetal Alchemist or Soul Eater, and not 1 nor 2, but 2 live-action movies. Now, the original PC-98 version is a bit difficult to get your hands on, given that emulating that OS is somewhat cumbersome with modern computers, and that version has no direct English translation patches. Luckily, this game has been re-released a million times with ever-growing titles, and even better, English translations. The version I'll be analyzing is Corpse Party Blood-Covered Repeated Fear. This is the most up-to-date version of the game, and presumably the one that the developers actually want you to play. It has some differences from the PC-98 original, which is much smaller in scope, had different scenes, and was less anime. One major element that got removed from the PC-98 version is a rudimentary combat system that was used in the final boss fight. This was the only real RPG section in the game. But changing or removing those things makes sense, given that the re-releases actually had a consistent presentation, direction, and budget behind them. Repeated Fear also includes all sorts of extra content outside of the main story, which helps expand the lore of the series, which we'll go into later. But if you're a purist and prefer experiencing the game as it was in the PC-98 version, there is a fan-made upgraded version of it that only changes the graphics, and this one's actually translated to English. This version is called Corpse Party Rebuilt, and I'll link it in the description. The game's story starts like your average horror movie, with a bunch of teenagers from a school called Kisaragi Academy messing around and telling horror stories on a rainy evening, just enjoying their school life. Sadly for them, one of their classmates, Mayu, is going to transfer away after that day, so the local occult freak, Ayumi Shinozaki, decides to perform a ritual to keep them together forever. The way I worded that makes it sound like she's gonna sacrifice them so that they all become a gross amalgamation of humans, but that's not exactly what happens. Enter the Sachiko Ever After ritual. This involves everyone in the room grabbing a hold of a paper cutout of a person, chanting a spell once for every person doing it, plus another one for Sachiko, and then tearing the paper doll apart. If everyone hangs onto the paper scraps, they will all stay together forever. But this is a horror game, they're losing that shit. As soon as they finish the ritual, an earthquake hits Kisaragi Academy, and all of the participants get fucking yeeted into what appears to be an entirely different school, where everything is in ruins and the windows don't open, because of course they don't. After various students start exploring the school, they learn that they are in an interdimensional nexus, full of unruly spirits of children. This weird dimension took the form of an old school called Heavenly Host Elementary, which is already a big red flag. Schools with names related to religion and spirituality are bad news. I can tell you from my experience. I'm not gonna go into much more detail about the story, because this is a very story-heavy game with a lot of twists, and frankly, it's a game you have to play if you like horror. But for the sake of it, I'll still talk about the characters for a bit. The first pair you take control of consists of Naomi, the very plain female MC, and her aggressively lesbian quote-unquote friend, Seiko, my personal favorite from this game. All you need to know about Seiko is that her ass is dry as fuck. I've already mentioned the Yumi before, and if you ask me, she's the true main character of the story, given that she's the driving force that moves the plot forward due to her occult knowledge. She's paired up with Yoshiki, your average punk who dyes his hair and smokes in the bathroom. You know, the kind of dude you'd want nothing to do with in real life. They're also accompanied by the teacher Yui, who's way nicer than any teacher I know. Then, we've also got Mayu, the girl who indirectly caused this whole conflict, because her pushover dad couldn't do anything about having to move out. Her hair accessory looks like a cock and balls. She's not really paired up with anyone, but she gets stalked by Morishige, who, just like all stoic nerds, is actually a complete pervert. Fun! Lastly, we have the male MC, Satoshi, whom I cannot tell you anything about, not because it's spoilers, but because he's so generic it hurts. He brought his lolly-bait sister Yuka with him, and being boring must run in the family, cause her only two traits are being cute and needing to piss really badly. Seriously, she spends more than half of the game needing to use the bathroom, and I don't think I need to explain how that ends in this horror game. There are two major antagonists in the game, which I will not spoil. Just like the rest of the characters in this game, they're not particularly deep in their motives, but they function well for this scenario. I've heard that one of them is essentially ruined in later games, but we can talk about that some other time. With that covered, let's talk about the gameplay. It's fairly simple, focused almost entirely on puzzles and exploration. Playable characters have an HP bar so that chase scenes aren't too difficult, which is something I feel more RPG horror games should do. There are many possible endings to get, mostly bad ones where your companion dies or where you mess up and die, but the ones in the final chapter aren't as simple. There's also a set of collectibles spread throughout the school, namely name tags, pun intended. These tags belong to the other students that have died in Heavenly Host, and by getting them you can unlock extra chapters that cover their experiences prior to their deaths. Since the game is split into chapters, you can replay them as much as you want if you want to get all the endings or the name tags, which are usually not that hard to get, but some endings can be a bit difficult if you're not using a guide. Generally, this game is not that difficult. Most of the puzzles are logical enough that you can solve them without help, and the chase scenes are quite easy. But regardless, you are given a lot of save points in case you're not feeling confident. The game's visuals are just what you'd expect from an RPG Maker game. Sprites that give you a general idea of what your characters look like, coupled with some nicely drawn anime portraits, as well as the occasional CG. These larger images have good art for sure, and they can do a great job at representing the more unsettling aspects of the game, especially during bad endings. But at the same time, they sometimes feel really inappropriate. Simply put, they are horny in places where being horny doesn't really belong. Ah yes, this character is about to get gruesomely murdered. Why not show off her underwear? If you ask me, this aspect could be one of two things. A desperate attempt at using sexual horror to increase the shock factor. Or, the likelier answer, the authors wanted to sneak their kinks into the game. I'm not gonna call the creators a bunch of eroguro piss-skink pedophiles, but I don't know, man, some scenes are a bit sussy and uncomfortable. This problem happens in the manga spin-offs too, which were written by the same people as the games. The first manga adaptation doesn't change that much, but some of the later ones, like Musume, well, I can't really show much without getting the feds on my ass. But yeah, they're lolicon shit. You know, really gets the noggin joggin'. But let's move on from that before YouTube restricts the channel. Overall, this was essentially a game that pioneered an entire genre, and it makes perfect sense. It creates a great atmosphere, it has an intriguing story, and the gameplay doesn't really get that much wrong compared to its peers. Plus, the music's really damn good. Another thing I really like about it is the fact that all the voice providers for the characters are small indie VAs, and not the same 5 big names that appear in new anime every single time. It really drives home the fact that this is a passion project, even if it's become more commercial with each new installment. Some people may call it an edgy and angsty mess, but newsflash, jackass, it's a horror game. What were you expecting from a game titled Corpse Party? I know I'm not shutting up about the game's flaws, but that's only because the game generally does everything it pretty much should, and I can't go into that much detail on why it works without spoiling major parts of the plot, which, I insist, you should experience as blindly as possible. It does a great job at building up its lore through vague hints, and eventually dropping the bombshells on you, and some of its more shocking moments will definitely get burned into your mind for some time. It may have its ups and downs because of the odd fan service stuff, but I still believe this game is a must play. Personally, it was my first horror game along with other RPG Maker ones, and it's a very nostalgic experience for me. Lastly, I'd like to mention that it's best to experience this game first before trying to consume other Corpse Party media like the anime. If you want to play it, it's available on Steam, PS4, and even the Switch and the 3DS somehow. But if you're poor and can't afford to buy things, you can easily emulate the PSP version. But I legally didn't say that, okay? Okay? Do you have any other RPG Maker horror games you want me to discuss? Make sure to comment your suggestions. And please like and subscribe, or you will be sent to Heavenly Host. My name is Felicia Goodnight, and I'll be seeing you in the next file. Sweet dreams!